Welcome to our Interviewing 101 workshop. My name is Jillian Fariga, and I am the coordinator of career services and outreach. So today we're going to be going over just some interview basics, just because some of this may seem kind of straightforward, or it might be information that you already know, but it's always good to get a reminder about it, and it can help spark other questions and other ideas. So our agenda today, I apologize, this is the old agenda, but we're going to go over my contact information, what is the purpose of an interview, interviewing best practices, and then go over any questions. So my contact information is here. You can book appointments online through Handshake. You can email me at jillian.fariga@woodbury.edu, or you can call me or text at 818-252-5207. So what is the purpose of an interview? It seems kind of straightforward, but the thing that we really want to remember with interviews is that from the perspective of the interviewer, the purpose of an interview is to filter out the possible candidates to find the best fit for the job. And so your only job is to show that you are a fit for that job and that you are a fit for that company. Just like your resume and your cover letter, I tell folks to see those as marketing materials. That's kind of your first impression on paper. The purpose of an interview is your first impression in person, whether you're doing that interview face-to-face or you're doing it virtually or even over the phone. It's a different impression than you would get from being just a person on paper. So the purpose of that interview is so that they can help to filter folks out, because on paper you might look super similar to other candidates, but once they actually start to talk to you, that's when they can see the differences between folks. And so there's three primary interview types. You have your standard interview. This is the one that we most commonly think about, and these are the questions that are going to get asked almost in every interview. That can include, tell us about yourself, what are your strengths and weaknesses, why should we hire you, and other basic questions like that. And so these are designed to basically provide the interviewer with general information that is going to cover a wide range of topics. And questions like, tell me about yourself and what are your strengths and weaknesses, can be really helpful for an employer, because if they've looked at dozens of resumes and applications, they might honestly forget some of the finer details with the folks that they decided to interview. And so when you are asked the question, tell me about yourself, then you get to be able to add some personality into it. You get to be able to talk about yourself a little bit more, and it can help them really remember you. So you want to make sure that you're making a good impression with these questions and that you're standing out by adding details that they can refer back to on your resume, by bringing up qualities that they're looking for, all of that good stuff. Then there's behavioral questions. And so this form of questions, they basically are trying to predict your future behavior based on your past behavior. So they might say something like, describe a time you worked as a part of a team. Tell us about a time when you failed. These kinds of questions can help the interviewer know how you've reacted in the past and how you might react if you work with their company or their organization moving forward. So if they ask you, describe how you worked on a team, and you talk really well about your teamwork and your cooperation and your communication skills and all of that good stuff, they would assume that you would be able to bring those skills forward into this position as well. And the last major type is situational. And so that's to basically assess what would you do. And so it goes a little bit with the behavioral ones, because the behavioral ones, they think of what your behavior might be based on what you've done in the past, but the situational one, they're basically giving you a problem and they want to see your critical thinking skills and your problem solving skills. So they might ask you something like, a deadline for a project you're working on is coming up. It's been moved up. What do you do about that? And so this problem solving can provide an avenue to measure your expertise and your experience, and it's a good idea to pull in some of those behavioral tools into this one and say, well, in the past I've done X, Y, and Z when I've had a deadline moved up quickly on me. that can just add more detail and make sure that you're really standing out with these different interview types as well. And so the common interview questions, like we kind of covered, the tell me about yourself. What you want to do with this question is you want to talk about your professional history, your present, and your professional future. And so what that might look like for a lot of you is describing any internships or other professional experiences that you've had in the past, whether that was volunteering, part-time, full-time, or even in fields that aren't directly related to whatever it is that you're interviewing for. You'll also want to mention that you are a Woodbury student, what your major is, when you expect to graduate, and why you would want to work for that company or organization and what you see yourself doing in the future with the degree that you're getting now. If you don't have a lot of work experience, that's totally okay too. Some great things to add in here would be talking about projects that you've worked on in your classes, or even just classes that you've taken where you can draw on those skills and say, well, I took this class titled Info 101 and I learned X, Y, and Z, which would be incredibly helpful to your organization because I know that this position involves a lot of working with X, Y, and Z. So don't worry if you don't have a lot of professional experiences. There are still things that you can pull on that you can bring up in this tell me about yourself question. With the behavioral questions, what you want to try to do with those is understand the underlying skills that they're looking for. So are they looking for someone that can learn quickly, some kind of technical ability if they're asking about different programs or softwares, collaboration? You want to give an answer that is the most relevant for the job. And so keeping in mind, if they're asking something like, when have you worked well on a team, trying to think of what it is that they're saying there. They're probably looking for someone who's a team player, who would be able to cooperate well with others, and who would be able to communicate well. If they're asking something about a project being moved up and you need to work on it quickly, that's probably some time management and organizational skills. So thinking about what the larger picture is and then pulling that in there is going to be really helpful. And I know the bottom one is real small. I apologize about that, but strengths and weaknesses are important to know. Personally, I don't like it when employers ask the weakness question because I think we all have weaknesses, and I think it's better to focus on someone's strengths. But if I had $1 for every time I've been asked my strengths and weaknesses in an interview, I'd have quite a bit of money. So keep in mind that you may be asked your strengths and your weaknesses, and it'll be good for you to know your genuine strengths and weaknesses in advance so that you don't have to think of it on the spot. And you want to be able to provide specific examples of your strengths. So not just saying, well, I'm a good listener, but saying, I'm a good listener because I've done X, Y, and Z, or, I'm a really good team player. And I know this because I've been on several different teams and we've worked really well together and we've accomplished the task that we were supposed to do. A great thing with these kinds of questions as well is referring back to specific experiences on your resume. So rather than just saying, in the past, I've done this, say, in the past at my position with ABC company, I did this, that, and the other thing. So that way, when they are referring back to your resume and they're thinking back to your interview, they can put the two together and say, oh yeah, I remember they talked about in their interview working for this company. So it can help you stand out. And then the weaknesses section can be really tough, and you do want it to be an actual weakness. A lot of folks try to spin it and make it into something that's more positive, and that's totally okay too, but it should be an actual weakness that you've identified for yourself. But what you want to do instead of focusing on the weakness is focus on what you've done to improve that weakness. Maybe you're not a great public speaker, but you've joined an organization on campus where you have a leadership role and you're working on your public speaking a lot. Or maybe you volunteer more in class, or you've joined different committees. Whatever that might look like, you want to talk about the things that you're doing to improve on your weaknesses rather than just saying, well, this is a weakness I have, I'm not doing anything about it. I hope that makes sense. And then the stages of an interview process. So preparation is going to be the first one, and you want to learn as much as you can about the company beforehand. And that would be doing your research, thinking about what you can offer to a company, and know how your skills and your experiences can help them achieve their goals. So you want to also have a list of questions prepared to ask the interviewer, because there's nothing worse than getting to that part of an interview where they say, do you have any questions for us? And you either don't have anything and you have to stumble and come up with something, or you don't ask anything at all. You always want to make sure that you have some kind of question that you can ask them at the end of the interview. And by doing all this research, not only are you going to feel more confident in yourself, that's going to show in the interview. And so if you get asked in an interview, why do you want to work for this company specifically, or why do you want this position specifically, you can say, I know your mission statement says X, Y, and Z, and I really connect to that because I also do that, or I also really want to work for a company that holds those values. When it comes to the position, saying, you know, I have strength in these areas, but these are other areas that I want to grow. It shows that you've done the research and you're just not mindlessly applying, and that you have some intentionality when you are applying to these positions. And then the introduction, like we were talking about before, the first impressions are everything. So you want to make sure that you're greeting the interviewer with a smile, a firm handshake in non-COVID times, but who knows what that'll look like in the future, and make sure that you're maintaining appropriate eye contact. And you want to engage in small talk as you're escorted to the interview room, but keep it professional. Of course, that's if it's an in-person interview, but even with phone interviews or Zoom interviews, whatever it ends up being, you can make small talk before the interview actually begins, because if they can have a good impression of you to start with, that's just going to end up that much better for you when you actually go into the interview. So, you know, just questions about the weather or how their day is going. It's always great to make folks talk about themselves, because people love talking about themselves, and they'll think of you more positively because you want to know more about them. And then, of course, you know, the interview is going to involve employer questions. And so you want to prepare for those as much as you can, because it's going to help you anticipate the next questions and know what it is that you want to cover and know what it is that you want to articulate. So you want to listen carefully to the questions, ask for clarification if needed, and don't rush your answers. Be clear and concise in your responses, and be honest if you don't know an answer. You don't want to lie or stretch the truth, but if they ask about a past professional experience you've had, and maybe you don't have any professional experiences that deal with what they've asked for, but you have class experiences with what they've asked for, go ahead and bring that up instead. I would always recommend folks never say, I don't have an answer for that, I don't have an experience for that. You do want to try to come up with something that you can connect. For instance, I know I've worked with some students who have said they haven't really had to manage conflict in their professional workplaces before, but almost all of us have had some kind of conflict with a family member or a friend, or, you know, even our professors or teachers. And so you don't want to focus on the conflict aspect of it and what it was that you were in disagreement about, but you want to focus on how you came to the solution. So if they ask, you know, is there a time you've had a disagreement with a coworker? How did you handle it? You could say, well, I haven't had a disagreement with a coworker, but in my personal life, this is how I handle disagreements. Another thing we want to keep in mind too when answering these types of questions is the who method. And so that involves what you did, how you did it, and what the outcome was. And that's something you want to focus on with your resume, with your answers, basically all of those things, because focusing on the who method ensures that you're going to be answering the questions that they're asking and that you're giving enough details. The one thing that I notice folks mix out on a lot is the outcome portion of it. So they'll say, you know, if we're talking about the disagreement question again, they'll say, well, in disagreements, I try to be the peacemaker, and they'll leave it at that. But you want to give them the solution, or you want to tell them what the outcome is of you being a peacemaker. So you can say, because I'm a peacemaker, we find a middle ground where we both agree. And that's how I come to, you know, solutions when I have a disagreement. Making sure that you're touching on that can be really important so that an employer knows more about you and your style. And then, of course, you want to gather information. The interview process is it's as much about you learning about them as it is about them learning about you. So I hope that makes sense. The interview process is not just them gathering information from you. You can also get a lot of information from them based off of the types of questions they're asking. If they're consistently asking questions about teamwork, you can probably figure out that they're going to have a lot of teamwork and you're going to be working with a lot of folks. If they consistently ask about conflict, on the other hand, you might be able to gather that maybe there's been some conflict in the office in the past. So you want to make sure that you're gathering as much information as you can, both with the questions that they're asking and also when you get the opportunity to ask questions at the end. You don't want to ask about salary or benefits unless they specifically bring it up. And then you always kind of want to turn it back onto them. So if they ask you what your salary expectations are, it's good to do your research in advance and say, well, I know that given where we live and given this field, this is the standard salary range, and I'm expecting to be somewhere in this range. Or you can say, I'd like to learn more about the position before I answer what my salary expectations are. And then when you're wrapping up, it's totally acceptable to inquire about the timeline. And in fact, I would encourage you to, and when you would expect a decision or next steps, because this may be a multiple step interview process. It may just be the one interview, you never know. And you want to offer a handshake, of course, in non-COVID times, thank the interviewer for their time, and follow up with either a handwritten note or an email. But I will say handwritten notes are becoming a bit of a thing of the past, so an email is probably the best way to go. Thank them for their time. Bring up something specific from the interview, like, I really appreciate that you talked about X, Y, and Z. When you ask your questions, maybe you could ask what a day in the office looks like, and they say, oh, we have donuts every Friday. And so you could say, oh, I love that. That sounds like a really fun work environment. So bringing up specific things shows that not only were you paying attention during the interview, it shows that this is a tailored email and that you're paying attention and doing all of those specifics. So for the preparation, I just want to emphasize this again. You want to make sure that you are reading everything in the job description, including the company overview, the job summary, the responsibilities of this position, the knowledge, skills, and abilities required, and make note of what you have and what you don't have. And so what I've done in the past when I've prepared for an interview is I've saved the job description to a PDF, and then I've added sticky notes or I've added comments to the different job description bullet points. And so if you have a bullet point that says works collaboratively with others, I would put quick notes to myself about these are times that I've worked well with others, just so that that way I could prepare for that in case they were to ask it in the interview. And something else that I want to recommend for you all is just to look at those bullet points and reword them into a question. So if it says something like knows X, Y, and Z software, then you would reword that to say, do you know X, Y, and Z software? Or how have you used X, Y, and Z software? And then just think of how you would answer that question, because oftentimes the bullet points are going to be how they're going to gather their questions. You also want to think if there are skills or areas where you don't meet it, how you can show that that would be a good area of growth for you and why this position would be an advancement for you. And you also want to look at specific verbiage. So if they're consistently saying industry specific words, you want to make sure that you're saying those industry specific words when you're interviewing. It just shows that you've done your research, and it shows that you would fit well with their company and with the field. And then, of course, there's the introduction and the employer questions. That's going to be part of the interview. So you always want to keep in mind what the company needs and what the interviewers are looking for. And you always want to answer questions with experiences that are relevant to the job that you're discussing. So while I said, totally fine to bring up personal experiences or, class experiences, if you do have professional experiences that relate to it, that can be even better, and make sure that it does relate to it. If it's not the right job for you, they might have other job openings. And so you do want to make sure that you're doing well in all of your interviews, just so that if other opportunities do come up, you can be available for it. And you want to make sure that you flatter them. You should always do this in your cover letter as well, but talk about what a great company they are, what a great opportunity it is, what great questions they're asking you. Just make sure that, you hype up the fact that you really do want to work for this company and you really want this job, rather than it's just another job and this is just another way for me to get money. Even if that is the case, you do want to make it seem like they're important or special somehow. And so just to go over a few of the basics, you want to arrive 10 to 15 minutes early, and that's both so that they can see that you're timely and so that you have time to actually find the place. If sometimes it can be a little difficult if we're going in person, there's always problems with, Zoom or other online platforms. So just making sure that you're figuring that stuff out early is going to be good. And part of that involves knowing the time and location of your interview, how long it's going to take to get there with traffic, if you have to travel, where you should park, and different things like that. And then you want to dress appropriately for your profession. And so our business students, that may involve like an actual suit and tie, but some of our more creative majors, or if you're applying for a company that has a little bit more of a laid back nature, that might not be a suit and tie, and it might just be a nice professional dress shirt and slacks, or, a skirt or a dress. Whatever that may look like for you. And you want to make sure that you treat everyone that you encounter with courtesy and respect, because the receptionist that you talk to might be asked for feedback during the hiring process and might be asked about who was the nicest or who seemed the most nervous before they were heading in. You want to make sure that you're not wearing a lot of cologne or perfume, just because that can be irritating to some folks and you don't want that to disrupt their view of you or disrupt the interview. You want to give appropriate eye contact, have good posture, a firm handshake in non-COVID times, and smile and have a friendly attitude the whole time that you're interviewing. And you want to make sure that you're using good grammar and diction. So instead of saying, yeah, you want to say yes. And I'm guilty of this too, trying to avoid saying the ums, the uhs, the ahs. You can take a pause instead of saying anything, and you want to make sure that you're ending your sentences firmly rather than saying, like, yeah, okay. However you may end those sentences. You can wrap it up by bringing in the initial question or say, and that's how I do X, Y, and Z. For your attire, again, this is going to kind of depend on whether it's in person or phone or virtual, but you want to make sure that your clothing is clean and professional in nature. You don't want to wear any kind of graphic t-shirts or clothing with rips or holes in it. And the rest of this is something that I've just been recommended by folks, but I do think this is maybe becoming a little bit more outdated when it comes to body art and piercings. The general recommendation is that any tattoo should be covered with clothing or other accessories if possible, and that you should remove any piercings, including multiple piercings in one ear. Just because the older generation tends to be a little less forgiving when it comes to that kind of stuff, and they may be higher up on the totem pole wherever you're interviewing, so they may be the ones that are judging this. But if your tattoos or your piercings are part of your identity and you wouldn't want to work for a place that couldn't accept that, then I would say, by all means, you should be able to feel comfortable in your work environment and they should be able to accept you for who you are. But if you are a little mindful or a little wary about your first impressions, those can be some things that you can do. And then when it comes to your hair, including facial hair, it should be clean, trimmed, combed, or styled in a way that doesn't draw any negative attention to it, which I think mostly boils down to the fact that we just want our hair to be clean. You don't want it to be greasy or any of that other stuff, but keeping your natural hairstyle is totally professional, and doing all of that is totally fine as well. So that's kind of it when it comes to the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so that we can chat.